I'm Nancy Roffman, and I'm here today, November 6, 2008, with Gerardo Weinstein at his home on Keller Springs in Dallas to talk about his life in Dallas for the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. So, Gerd, let's start off with what country did your parents come from?
My parents came from Germany. We have a, what do you call it, genealogy, or what is it called?
Genealogy?
Genealogy of the family, and we go back to 1784.
Oh, that's interesting. And where did
my parents, well, my father was born in Jever, in Jever, which is North Germany, and my mother was born in Mönchengladbach, which is in the Rhineland, next to, it's a small industrial.
Speak a little louder.
A little bit louder, okay. It's a small, was a small but important textile city of approximately 250,000 people. And that's where my mother was born. And that's in Mönchengladbach. I was also born in January of 1924.
And how did your parents meet?
I really don't know exactly how they met, but they met. Both my parents were born in July of 1894. At the ripe age of 20, in 1914, my father volunteered to defend his fatherland, as almost all eligible young men did, and the only thing I know is that he was engaged to my mother prior to his entry in 14. Where they met and under what circumstances they met, I really.
So, what did your father do?
My father was a wonderful human being. He was more of a social nature than, he was not really a businessman, and it didn't really interest him much. He was in excellent health when he went into the army, and 4 years later he came out of the army a sick person, and he remained sick almost for the rest of his life. After the war, my mother and my father started a little store of goods which were manufactured in the city and in other areas. And unfortunately, in 1923-24, when the terrible inflation took place in Germany, it destroyed 75% of the small business people, and they went broke, as many others did too. And this was in 1924, and then he had several jobs, administrating mainly office building for a wealthy cousin which he had, who lived in Holland, who made investment in Germany. And this is where he stayed until 1929, when the World Depression took place, and his wealthy relative from Holland had apparently was over-leveraged, and he took his life and lost everything. And
not your father, that was the...
No, this is a wealthy relative from Holland who owned this building. But he must have been well over-leveraged because he lost everything and then decided to take his own life, like many other people did at that time. What my father did exactly since 2930 until 1933, when we left, he had several jobs, and my uncle, his brother, who lived in Hamburg, helped him to find, helped him. And he was working there in 1933 in Altona at the beginning of 1933, which I remember very clearly. because when when the first boycott took place in Germany, particularly not in the northern part, but in Rhineland and below in southern Germany, that was the first day when April the 1st, 1933, when the stores were identified with a Morgendorfit and with letters, "Don't buy with Jewish people," and so on. And my mother called him on the phone because he traveled from Mönchengladbach to Altona, I guess, the weekends. I really don't know the exact details. And she called him and she said, "I want you to come home because I'm afraid to walk on the streets." And she told him briefly what happened. And he told her, "I'm taking the 3 o'clock train, and you go and call up my friend so-and-so," which was a Gentile person who belonged to the SA, because he was also unemployed at that time, and tell him to put on his uniform, and you and him come to the station and pick me up, which he did. And when my father saw what was happening in Germany, he couldn't believe it. And he turned around that evening and told my mother, he says, "We have to leave Germany. We have to leave Germany, but we also have to leave Europe, because one day all of Europe will burn." The reason why he reached that conclusion was that he understood the nature of evil of the German extreme movements. He had read Mein Kampf, and he was convinced, he believed every word Hitler said, and Hitler practically announced to the world in his book, which he wrote in 1924, what his intentions were. And so he recommended all his friends, particularly the wealthier, to get out, and which they said that he was crazy, this was a passing matter, etc., etc. So my uncle, who was in the cotton business, had close relationship with the Perutz family, and one brother was a large cotton merchant in Vienna, and the other one was an early Zionist who moved to Palestine, and they opened a exporting firm in Alexandria in Egypt, and he started some activities in Palestine, in Tel Aviv. So my uncle recommended that he should seriously consider moving to Palestine at that time. But my father, who was a very convinced national Jew, was not a Zionist. He had no intention of going to Palestine, and I really was too young to understand their concern and their apprehensions, and I wish, but I was only 5 years old. No, I was 9 years old. I just had become 9 years old. And I didn't have the maturity which I have today to ask the type of questions which I should have, which of course I didn't understand. My mother had a brother called Uncle Herman. We called him Uncle Herman, who had to leave Germany in 1921 because he was a gambler, and the police was after him, and they were going to put him in jail. And my dad bought him a ticket, and in those years he would send the black sheep of the family either to the United States or to Latin America. In his case, he went to Latin America. He bought him a ticket, and he was supposed to take a ship out of Genoa for Argentina. And by the time he arrived at Genoa, he called up my dad and he says, "You have to send me money." He says, "I lost the ticket gambling." Anyway, this is just to give you a little bit of a background of this man, of my uncle. And he went to South America, and my parents lost practically contact with him until 1928, when they received a letter from him from Ecuador inviting his younger sister to visit him in Ecuador. So my mother was apprehensive, because her sister, there were three in the family, the one male and these two females. One of them was my mother. And my aunt was not, she wasn't 100%, but she wasn't, she wasn't sick in any way. Anyway, they bought her a ticket and off she went to Ecuador. And when she arrived in Guayaquil, my uncle was in Buenos Aires. He had forgotten that he invited his sister. So you can imagine the reliability they felt for him. Anyway, it so happened that in 1933, in April, at the end of April, they received a letter from my uncle from South America. He happened to live in Lima, Peru. And he had addressed the letter to my father's brother in Hamburg, with whom he tried to develop some business, and he had his address. He didn't have the address of his own sister. Anyway, in the letter contained a note, please forward this letter to my sister and to Arno, whose address I don't have in my possession. So he got the letter, and in the letter said that I've read what is in the newspaper, what is happening in Germany, particularly to the Jewish German people. Go to the Peruvian consulate in Köln. Your visas are authorized.
And what year was this?
That was at the end of April of 1933.
And how old were you?
I was 9 years old. And my mother, of course, went up in arms and said, you can't rely on my brother. You remember what he did to my sister? He is a gambler. I'm not going to go out to live amongst the Indians. We don't speak the language. We don't have any money. Anyway, my father was so convinced that this was an act of the Almighty, and he says, we are going. And he put his foot down, and contrary to the complaints of my mother, he sent her, my mother, my aunt, and us two children. I have a brother who is 3 years older by the name of Gerardo Weinstein. And he sent us to live in Holland with a relative who was happy to house us for a couple of weeks. And then he sold whatever little we had in furniture, whatever else, and bought the tickets to Peru and had exactly $1,500 left in his pocket to take care of a wife, a sister-in-law, and 2 young children.
Let's stop here.
Okay.
Because before we talk about your life in Peru, I want you to discuss your life in Germany. Would you say that your family was middle class?
My father, yes, we were middle class. None of them, looking back, whether they were cousins or so, were professional people. They were average middle class German Jews. And to tell you, if you ask me about my life in Germany, it is amazing, but I don't remember anything except for an occasional flash, of something which I did or which they said I did.
What about schools? Do you remember anything about this? Did you go to a public school, a private school? Did you go to any kind of a Jewish school?
I imagine we went to a Jewish school. I have no idea.
You just don't remember?
I really have no idea.
Okay, all right. And you don't remember anything about going to the synagogue or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No, my father, this is an interesting point which you raise. My father was, as it was customary in those years, for those young people who didn't go into the academic world, that they would be sent into an apprenticeship, which was a custom in Germany for 3 years, to learn whatever trade they were interested in or assigned to. And my father, as a young man, after he left school, before he went into the army, was a trainee for some very religious Jews who demanded that he would get up every morning at 5 o'clock and read for 2 hours the Torah. And he made a promise to himself that if he had children, he would never submit his children to this type of tyranny, which he felt when he was 16 or 17 years old, because his father was born in 1894, and he went into the war in 1914. So he must have been he must have finished school at 17 and was in apprenticeship when the war broke out, which he welcomed just to get out of this thing. And as I said, the war years, he had some terrible experiences. He was covered up for 24 hours in a battle, and he came out a sick man from which he really never recovered. So this is as far as I know about Germany. The only flash which comes to my mind was that one day I was on the street and the Nazis came marching by, and I ran over to a kiosk which sold these Hakenkreuz, the swastika, put it on my lapel and walked with them, marched with them. So you can imagine what type of a youngster I was. And that's it. I mean, it is amazing. I remember everything from the first day we arrived in Lima, Peru, but I don't know anything. I can't visualize the home which we lived in or the apartment which we lived in.
Holidays, you don't remember anything about celebrating holidays with your family, any of the Jewish holidays?
No, the Jewish holiday, no, I don't remember anything. I mean, we celebrated. My father was very traditional in that respect. He celebrated, even after in Peru and to the end of his days, he was very traditional, and we celebrated the Jewish holidays, but the problem was that the prayer books were all in Hebrew. There was no translation. We never learned Hebrew. I never went to the Hebrew school, so to me, going to the synagogue, we went. My mother forced us to go out of respect to my father, who spent the whole day, at the temple, at synagogue at the time. And the meaning of the prayers or the celebrating Friday night only became I only became aware when I came to Dallas as a 20-year-old man, because I went to Temple Emmanuel, and you had the English and the Hebrew, so that you could follow in English language and understood what you were reading. And that impressed me greatly, and which, of course, that feeling we never had before then.
So, okay, so your father, you're with your brother in Holland, and your father and your mother...
Yes, we stayed there, that's right, and we stayed there for 3 weeks, and we left in May on a Dutch steamer to Lima, Peru.
And this was 1930?
1933. We were the first refugees, so-called refugees, to make the distinction between immigrant and a refugee, to arrive in Lima, Peru. And there was a Jewish organization, and according to the records we kept in the Jewish organization in Lima, Peru, we were the very first refugees who arrived in Lima as a result of the Jews escaping from Germany as a result of the persecution.
Religious persecution, right. So let's talk about your life when you got to Peru.
Well, the life in Peru, to our amazement and to the tranquility of my mother, my uncle and his son, he had a little son at that time, my cousin, first cousin, was 6 years old at that time, were on a boat, because in Lima, Peru at that time when you arrived, they didn't have a harbor. So you stayed outside and you were unloaded into small lanchas, they call it, small boats, and one of the small boats coming along the ship was my uncle and my little cousin waving at us. So that was a relief that somebody was there to take care of them. My uncle had rented a house, and he was wonderful. He was still the same gambler who made fortunes one night and lost it the next night. That was his nature. But he was wonderful to my parents, and my parents were wonderful to him. So it worked out very well. We arrived in Lima, and my uncle, of course, had a relationship with the manager of the largest insurance company, and they bought, and he persuaded them to buy a bottling company, mineral bottling company, and my dad was appointed the manager of this, running this bottling plant. And these were wonderful years until 1939. Those were wonderful years because my father was very dedicated to the Jewish refugee problem, and he became president of the you have to remember that in those years you still had the separation, the distinct separation amongst the Jews, the Ashkenazis, the Sephardim, and the Yekes, the Germans. And even in Lima, when we arrived, there were three organizations. You know, the Ashkenazis were considered mainly the Polish and the Eastern Jew. The Ashkenazi, the Sephardi were the Spanish-speaking Jews, and then they had a small German colony, which each one had their own synagogue and their own social.
I heard of the Ashkenazic, the Sephardic, and what were they called?
I call them Yekes, because the Yekes, the German Jews were known as Yekes amongst the other Jews. You know.
It's not a nice name, no?
Yekes is, no, because they were different. I mean, they were more...
What would it translate to mean?
Yeke? I have no idea.
German, I guess German.
Just German,
But
okay.
not in a nice way.
Did the German Jews consider themselves superior to the other two groups?
Unfortunately, yes.
That's what I thought.
Unfortunately, yes. That is something which I didn't understand at that time, but in retrospect, I think it was a very stupid behavior. And because Hitler taught us that there was no difference between Jews, whether they were Russian Jews or Polish Jews or German or French or English Jews, he just sent them into the concentration camp, into their death without making any distinction. So, however, I must say that they were smart enough to form a little organization where each one of the three segments was represented. And they spoke with one voice when it came to, you know, political matters. Because in Latin America, as long as you stayed out of politics, they left you alone. And there was the Jews and anybody else could live very freely and do whatever he wanted to, as long as he would not get involved in politics. Because he exposed himself to not necessarily persecution, but he exposes himself to a danger. So when it came to speaking with one voice, when the government, or any time the government, there was some relationship or some need to speak to them, the Jewish community spoke with one voice, which was good.
So would you say that all you said each one of the Jewish groups had their own synagogue, and did they socialize pretty exclusively within that group?
Oh yes.
And did they all live? Did they live in separate areas too?
Mostly they did, and very seldom were there intermarriages between one and the other.
Well, yeah, they frowned upon it.
Now, this was something which I am very proud of, because when I was 12 years old, we only were amongst the German Jews, there were about 8 kids. And so we formed a little organization, and they asked me, because I was the oldest, I suppose, at the time, to head the group. And a thing which I didn't know, so I said, well, if it's a Jewish group, let's call ourselves with a Jewish name. So I read about Hashomer HaTzair, no idea what they were, what their political outlook was, etc. They turned out to be the far communist, and I was far from a communist. Anyway, and when we formed this little group, I said to myself, this is ridiculous. I was very friendly with the people in the Sephardic group, and because they were the majority, and so I went to the president of that group, and I said, you know, it's silly. We are 8 youngsters, you are the largest group. Why don't we make an effort to form a young Israelite group? And we called it AHI, Association of Young Israelites. He liked the idea. Then we went to the Ashkenazis, and they had two groups. They had the intelligentsia, the far left group, and they had the more, normal group, I call them. Of course, the intelligentsia turned us down flat, but the other group agreed. So we formed this young group of what we call Association of Young Israelites, and as a result of it, because we all spoke Spanish, because the German group spoke German, the Sephardi spoke Spanish, and the Ashkenazi spoke Yiddish. So you had this language and cultural difference, I could call it, which was difficult to overcome. You know, when you're older, you're accustomed to your own way of life. But as a result of this association, which flourished long after I was gone, into an active and permanent group. And as a result of it, intermarriages took place between the Sefaradis, etc. For instance, from a personal experience, I was 15 years old, and I was crazy for a little girl who was 14 years old, and no, I was older, sorry, I was 17 years old. She was 60 years old, and I wanted to go out with her. And when her brother found out that because she had lost her father, and when the brother of her mother found out that she was going out with a yeke, he prohibited it. I mean, the older generation were crazy. I mean, it's this negative aspect of our religion is not unique to any one group. They were
very intolerant.
Very common amongst them.
Right.
But
so the group, was it primarily a social group?
Mm-hmm.
Social
group. And what about your schools? Did you go to public schools? Did you go to Jewish schools?
No, I didn't. I went to, yes, that's an interesting thing. When we arrived in Peru, my parents put us in the German school. And this
was a Jewish school or just a
No,
German?
that was not Jewish school.
Okay. Okay.
So they put us in the German school, and I went to school. That was the only real schooling I had. I went in 1933, 34, and 35. And in 35, the German school received orders from Germany to dismiss all Jewish kids. And the principal of the German school refused to obey the order because he said he couldn't understand it. Mm-hmm. And he was forced out, formed his own school, and the German colony tried to destroy that school. I mean,
was that the school then that you went to?
No, I didn't go to that school.
You stayed in the other school.
I left the school, really schooling in 1935. I was 11 years old. But then my parents thought that, I always said I wanted to be in the cotton business because my uncle was in the cotton business and he traveled all over the world, and I thought that was nice. So I told my parents I want to go to the cotton business. They decided, well, if you do, you have to learn English. And so they sent me to an English school, which unfortunately was headed by a father, a Scottish father, religious, the priest. And he was a drunkard. That school had a wonderful reputation, but by the time I got there, it was physically in decline, and all the organization had left, and this father who was drunk, he was the only teacher left. And we were 6 people there. And he was, 15 minutes after we started class, he said, break, because he ran into the kitchen. He told us that it was in his home to go and drink his beer. So we didn't really, I stayed there for 2 years, but one thing I did learn, I learned the language. And I liked him because he would take the 6 kids to the boxing fight. He liked boxing, and then he would take us, and this was our delight. So we didn't learn much, and I quit that school at 38.
And you were how old then?
14 years.
14. Okay.
And then for a year I didn't do anything. I wanted to become a jockey, but my weight. But the owner of the business my father managed also was interested, and my father was interested in horses, and he persuaded him to buy race horses. And I used to go twice a week to work to train these horses. I mean, to run them on Mondays and Fridays. But that idea was dispelled, and we waited for my uncle to come to Lima, because in order for him to make arrangement with one of his cotton connections to engage me as an apprentice in the trade. And this is when I started I was 50, beginning at 15 years old. They put me he placed me with an English cotton firm. And
And this was in Lima?
Yeah, in Lima. This was in 1939, and I worked for them for 9 months, and then the war broke out in September, and one day I was called by the manager, and he says, I'm very sorry, but I got orders from London to dismiss all German citizens. I told him, I'm not a German citizen, I'm a Jew. Don't you know that the Jews are being persecuted in Germany? He says, I'm sorry. He happened to be an American, by the way, this manager. So I left, and that was probably the best thing which could have happened, because I transferred over to Bunge, which they just started. This was an international an international firm headquartered earlier in Belgium, and then moved as a result of the First World War to Buenos Aires. And they were just starting out in Peru, and I was number 7 in the organization, from the big boss to the switch, to be. And this was a German manager, and he accepted me. My uncle talked to him, and he accepted me under one condition, that if he would train me, that my uncle promised him that I would not work for him, and which my uncle agreed to. And number 2, he said, he addressed me, and he says, I'm going to put you, every 6 months I put you in a different section, and you're going to have to work hard. And hard I worked, and he fulfilled his word. And for 6 years, I really trained with them. And then I decided to come to the States, because I wanted, but that's another story.
Okay, let's backtrack a little bit. So while you were living in Peru and your father was managing the bottle plant, would you say that you were middle class?
Was he what?
Would you say that you were middle class when you were living in Peru? Upper class?
No, not upper class. My father was middle class, like all the other Jewish people. Because you have to remember that Latin America is different from the United States or Europe. You had the Indians, you had the middle class, and the very upper class, which the upper class in Peru consisted of maybe 75 to 100 families who owned practically everything, and who lived a life of their own. They had a relationship with business people, but their social life was completely excluded, Then you had the large middle class, and as far as the Jewish group, they were treated just exactly like the British group and the French group and the Italian group, and they, each group had their own social environment, their social activities, and their social clubs, and etc. So they didn't really make in Peru a distinction whether you were Jewish. To them, you were, we are German Jews. I mean, they considered us probably as Germans because we spoke Germans, just like most of the Jewish people. You didn't really have any poor people in Peru. You didn't, amongst, of course, like everywhere else, you had a few who who became very wealthy, who were the leadership in the community, and most of them were well established. They all had their own homes, or most of them had their own homes. They drove their own cars, and really poor people, you had probably a few somewhere. You always have some losers in every society. But
So what about, and the temple, the synagogue you went to was the German? You went to
Yes.
the German synagogue?
the German
And did
synagogue.
they have a Sunday school? Did you ever go
No.
to Sunday school?
As a matter of fact, in 1933, when the high holidays approached, there were just 11 German male people, amongst them a doctor. And they were celebrating Rosh Hashanah, and he was called on an emergency case, and the services had to stop.
They didn't have a menu.
They didn't have a menu. So, no, and the German grew, as the years progressed, more German Jews arrived in Lima, Peru. Through the efforts of my parents, they arranged the coming of all our family, plus 93 people in total. They could have brought in 930 people, because the first thing my father did when he arrived in Lima and was a little bit established, wrote to everyone, to his family and to his friends, come to Peru. It was easy in that time to get the visas. You went to the foreign ministry, and they were delighted to receive Europeans. But as the years passed, it became gradually more difficult, and by the year 38, 39 came along, the doors were closed. There was absolutely no way of getting them in, with money or otherwise. And so he wrote to a lot of people, and one of his good, wealthy friends wrote back in 1934. He said, they have to kick me out before I think of leaving my country. You know, some of the German Jews were more German than Jews, than the Germans did. And so when we had in Lima, no, as far as I'm concerned, I only had, the holidays. We were forced to go to synagogue because out of respect to my father. But I had the only thing my father did, what I did, before I started working, and when I was 13 and 14 years old, I used to go with my dad to the port, and he was the one who would receive the ships, who would either arrive, the few immigrants stayed to St. Lima, or many went to Bolivia on false passports, and to Chile. And he went there to help whatever they could do. And he was appointed a representative of the joint later on to organize, they made the money available to rent a house and set up, beds and a kitchen so that these people had a place. Some of them arrived in the later years with only their shirts on their body. And so that they wouldn't be on the street, they would be taken care of. And father was my father was basically a dedicated social worker than a businessman. Money didn't mean anything to him, to the dismay of my mom. That was always a struggle between them. And there was a period when he lost in 1939 he lost his job because the manager was a German, good German, but he got sick, and he went into the German hospital, and there they started working on him. You have to dismiss that Jew.
No, but didn't he have a niece who came?
Pardon?
Wasn't there a niece who came from Germany?
Yeah. Well, he had a niece who lived with him, and but no, that's something else, sweetie. This is when he died. She became the owner. But by that time, Dad already had left.
So your father lost his job?
My father lost his job, and that was, I think, that really took out of him a lot. Took took out of him a lot.
And then did he find another job?
Well, yes, he started representation. He had a couple of connections in the States and in Argentina, and he made a living, and by doing, representing an American firm to sell, goods. Don't you have to remember that in those years, the whole trade was different from what it is today. So he made a living, and as I said, Dad was more interested in his social activities than
Right.
he was in.
But you did go to the synagogue. You really never had any religious training. You didn't know how to speak Hebrew, and your mother, would you celebrate with other families the holidays? Any of the holidays? You
No,
remember
there's the
things like
holidays, the high holidays we had at the house. All the family would come to
all
us.
of your family.
Yes, we would have the holidays, but I mean, it's when we come together like we do here after the temple, you eat together, etc. But
So let me ask you, when you got to Peru, did your family, and you did tell me your family experienced some forms of anti-Semitism.
not at all.
Well, you told me that when you were in one of the schools, that
the German schools.
the German school
Oh, yes.
had to leave
Yes.
because you were Jewish.
Yes.
But
At
was
that
a German
point-
school.
And you also, didn't you have to leave one of the cotton merchants because they were owned by the English, and the English didn't want any Germans working for them?
Yes, I know, but this wasn't a form. This wasn't a form of anti-Semitism. This was a form of. The British firm. I was ordered because they considered me a German.
Right. They considered you a German. All
And
right. But the school-
the German school is because we were Jewish, but the anti-Semitism in Lima really didn't exist. I mean, you lived your life, and you spoke for us who spoke the language, and we lived. I did never, to tell you the truth, I'm almost 85 years of age. Personally, I've never confronted an open anti-Semitism in my whole life.
That's lucky.
Whether it's in Peru, whether it's in all my travels, in business travels, and here in the United States, I really have never confronted somebody, in open anti-Semitism.
Have you?
Okay, so let's go back now. You worked for the cotton merchant
Yes.
for 6 years. How many?
For 6 years, and then I came to the States.
So
because I
now, what
wanted-
year was it that you left Peru and came to the United States?
To the United States in 1946.
And how old were you?
I was 22 years old.
All right.
And I left Lima because I had the idea I wanted to have an education, and you thought I'd come to the United States for an education, and I thought the idea of I would serve in the army for 2 years, and then you would become immediately an American citizen, and you would have free college studies. I was young, I didn't understand it, because even today, if you have to go to college, you have to have finished high school. I never finished high school. So anyway, when I came here to the States, the first thing, I went to the selective service, and I said, when can I register? Because
Where did you come? Did you come first to Dallas?
No. I went to New York.
And did you choose New York? Did you have relatives there? Why did you
My
choose
brother
New York?
was there for 1 day when I arrived, because he lived in Detroit.
Okay.
And, you talk about anti-Semitism, that's true. When I was in New York, I had a recommendation, of course, from my people in Lima to the president of the New York Cotton Exchange. And so I went the first day to the New York Cotton Exchange, introduced myself, and said I need a job. And I spoke to a Swiss firm. And he said, yes, we can use you. Go downstairs and fill out the form. He said, we have a place for you. So I filled it out, and they said religion, and I put Jewish, of course. And the girl took it in, and then she came out and said, we will let you know. I said, the guy upstairs told me yes, I know, but we will call you. And that was at the end of that. in that respect, I suffered anti-Semitism because of the Swiss firm wouldn't take any Jews. But I didn't consider this as as an anti-Semitic. To me, I didn't even understand it, what it was all about. And then I went to register, and they said, you have to register within 90 days. I said, fine, I can register immediately. And I said, do you get your nationality, your American nationality? Because I was stateless at the time. I had no nationality.
So you never became a citizen in Peru?
Yes, I did afterwards. That comes after.
Okay, but not
At
before
that time, I didn't want a German passport, and after the war, I could have had a German passport, but I didn't want to travel on a German passport.
So what, would you travel on a passport?
On a laissez-passer, no, on a stateless piece of paper. It's one sheet of paper
okay.
with your photograph, and which is valid for 1 year.
Okay.
So I said, well, if I get into the army, become an American citizen, I don't have any problems. He said, unfortunately, the guy told me that law rescinded 2 years ago. After the war, that law was rescinded. He said, even if you if you go into the army for 2 years, you don't get any free studies, that law was rescinded. I said, thank you. I said, what is the latest I can register? He says, 90 days. I said, thank you. And I went across the street, and on the 89th day, I booked my trip back to Lima. I wasn't going to serve in the army for 2 years and be in the same position as I was before, so I said, anyway, I went back to Lima, and I went back to
What did you do for those 33 months that you were there?
I worked for it's funny, I didn't have much money, and one night I saw, when I didn't have a job, I saw that the cable company was looking for people to do it. I saw that as a reserve. And as luck has it, I was walking one night on a back street in New York, and somebody calls my name. And he says, good. He says, what are you doing here? And I explained to him. He says, well, what are you going to do now? I said, for the next 3 months, I have time. I'm going to find a job. He says, I'll come out. He was a gentleman from Lima, Peru. He took me to his cousin, and the cousin immediately employed me.
Okay.
He said he was in the export business of goods to Latin America. And this is funny. And he said to me at the time, he says, how much will I get? I said, I don't have much money to live. No, he says, we'll pay you $75 a week. I said, is that enough? He said, well, that's more than I would pay to somebody else. This was in 1946. I said, well, okay, I take it. And he was involved in shipping mainly women's pocketbooks, every type of article you can imagine, in little packages of $50 or less, because they could be imported without an import license. So he says, you handle all the shipment and etc. Are you capable? I said, of course I am. And so I worked for him for about a month and a half. And then I found out that he asked me to double invoice, make an official invoice and another invoice. I said, why do you do that? He says, well, this is the real invoice and this is the official invoice. I didn't like that. So I said, no, I'm not going to... Was he trying not to pay taxes?
Was he trying to not pay taxes?
No. For the guy in South America, and for him, I don't know. I said, I don't like this, I'm leaving.
Okay.
So I left. And I tried to find something else, and it didn't work out. I wasn't really trying too hard. And then I went back to this guy and I said, look, I'm going to stay here another 5 weeks. I'd be willing to work for you, but don't ask me to, you do whatever you want to do. That's not my business. I'll handle the shipping business. And besides that, I said, I want a $25 raise. He says, okay. So I worked with that. He gave me $100 and a week. And that was it. And then I went back to Lima, and when I arrived in Lima on a Friday morning, I went back to Bunge, the cotton firm. And when I walked in, the manager laughed at me and he says, I knew you were going to come back. I said, no, you don't really know the reason why I came back. He said, anyway, he immediately took me back, and I made certain conditions, and he accepted all 3 conditions, and I started working on Monday morning. And that was, that I was in the much higher position as when I left. So this worked out very well. And during the next 3 years, until 49, I became a Peruvian citizen. And because the firm which I worked for, Bunge, was one of the leading companies, and their president of the board of directors was the ex-minister of foreign affairs. So I went to see him one day, and I said, "Can you help me?" He says, "What is your number?" The next week I became a Peruvian. I mean, it's fast. And then I asked of this gentleman, I go into this. Anyway, I asked my manager, I said, "I want a transfer to Brazil." I wanted to get out of Lima for a personal reason. I had an affair with a Peruvian young lady for 5 years, and we separated, and she left Lima, and I wanted to leave Lima. Anyway, this is
so did you separate because your parents disapproved, or
no. This was a matter of a love affair, which went sour, and
you needed a change.
So I wanted to get out of Lima because it was impossible for both of us to be there. And I asked for a transfer to Brazil, and he promised me that. He said in 6 months. And when the 6 months were up, the lawyer for the firm, who was a friend of mine, came in and he said, "Congratulations." I said, "Congratulations for what?" He says, "You've been appointed yesterday at the board of directors as the manager for the southern activities of La Fabril." I said, "No." I said, Cesar, you're mistaken. I'm going to Brazil." He said, "No, sir. You were approved unanimously to become the president, the manager of in ICA."
So manager for what area?
In southern Peru, for the whole area in southern
okay.
Peru. So I said to him, "Are you serious?" He says, "Yes." So I went into the manager office and I said, "Mr. Rossing, when am I leaving for Brazil?" He looked at me, he says, "Well, plans have changed." I said, "Maybe for you, not for me. When are you sailing to Brazil?" He says, "You're not going to Brazil." "Okay, I'm leaving you." So I just walked out of there. He says, "You can't leave." I said, you see me walking out of here." And I walked out. And I walked over to my uncle and I told him that. And he says, "Wonderful." He says, "Would you like to go to Europe?" He had a small interest in a firm in Holland. And he says, "To sell cotton for me in Europe." I said, "Sure." So I went, the following week we went off to Holland. And that's where I stayed for 2 years.
And it was just you?
Just
you.
me.
Okay.
And we had those were 2 wonderful years, unencumbered. They gave me a little cabriolet, open car, and opened this expense account, and I traveled all from Gothenburg to Lisbon, and from Genoa to Manchester. I could arrange my trips according to what I wanted to. So I was 3 weeks on the go, and 1 week I stayed in the office.
And did you have relatives? Did you have your uncle's family still live in Holland? Did you
No.
have relatives in Holland?
He lived in Peru.
Right. Okay. So there were no relatives left in Holland. Okay.
I stayed with them. And I became very close to the to the owner of the company, and then I had a Peruvian passport, and the Peruvian passport required that I should go back to Lima every 2 years, otherwise I would lose the citizenship. So I left for Peru, and I spent 2 days in New York and visited the people which we represented in Europe, and they offered me a job which I couldn't refuse. And this is what brought me to Dallas. They said they required, what they wanted was to organize the Latin America division and Mexico and Central America. I spoke the language, I had the qualification, and they offered me a wonderful opportunity which I couldn't say no to. And I came to Dallas in 1951.
And how old were you?
In 51, I was 28 years old. And so he asked me, when can you start? I said, in 1 month. He says, why 1 month? I said, I'm getting married. He said, wonderful, congratulations. Who's the lucky one? I said, I haven't got the faintest idea.
We have 5 minutes.
We have 5 minutes, and then you can change the tape, right? Okay, so what happened with you and Helga? How did you meet Helga?
Well, I was very close to my father, very close. While in Europe, we used to write each other twice a week. And he would tell me all about what happened in Lima and his faults with Mama and so on. And I told him everything, what I did, and it was a wonderful relationship. And I wanted to get married. I had met a young lady from, a Jewish lady from Buenos Aires in Europe. And so it was understood that we liked each other. And, so when I went to Lima, I told my dad, and my dad told me, he says, Gert, he says, there's only one girl I like you to get married to. I said, who is that? He said, the kleine Helga Wolf. I said, I don't know her. He says, well, don't worry, you're invited for dinner on Friday, you meet her. And anyway, so to make a long story short, I had exactly 30 days, and 2 weeks had gone by. And everybody was pushing me to make up my mind, and finally I decided to, you know, on the third, we had one day I took her up in the mountains to see how we would react, you know, physically and so on. And everybody was pushing me, and so finally I decided, okay, let's go. So I went over to her house and went to her uncle, and I said, of course they were all expecting it, and asked for a hand in marriage. I said, just a minute, let me go over to Helga. I said, Helga, is it okay to get engaged? She said, yes.
So how old was Helga?
Helga was exactly 18 years.
I was 18.
And you were 28.
And 28.
And you've known each other 2 weeks.
2
2
weeks. Yeah.
Yeah,
So we got engaged, and we made a big party in Lima, and we were supposed to, and she didn't speak a word of English, so we decided to find a girls' school closest to Dallas as possible. And we came up with Gulf Park College in Gulf Park, Mississippi.
Gulfport.
Gulfport. And that's where she went, and I went to work in Dallas. And one day I received a phone call from the president of the Gulf Park College, Dr. Cox, at the office, and I said, anything happened? He says, no, he says...
So you said that you got a call from the president of the Gulfport College.
Yes, and he said, and I was worried. I said, did something happen? He said, oh, no, Helga is fine. She says, I received a call from the immigration department in New Orleans that they were going to pick up Helga next week because her papers, her laissez-passer is going to expire. To explain this, Helga had no nationality, and when she came to the United States, she was given by the Peruvian marriage which needs to be undertaken in order to establish her ability to remain in this country. Besides, it's not going to be a consummated marriage. Do you understand what I'm saying? And he said to me, well, under one condition. I said, what is your condition? He says, nobody shouldn't talk about it. I said, Dr. Cox, I promise you, if you don't talk about it, I won't talk about it. So finally Helga came the next day, and we went to the
City Hall?
City Hall, and at that time you had to take your blood and wait for 2 days, a blood test. And Max Vernon, who was a, that's another story, who was also in the cotton exchange, and who was a member of Temple Emmanuel, arranged, at my request, a marriage by Rabbi Olin. So on Thursday morning, we went to Temple Emmanuel in South Dallas. Max Vernon, Mr. and Mrs. Silverman from the office, George from the office, Helga and I, and their 2 children. And we walked into Rabbi Olin's study, and he got up, and we introduced him. He put down his pipe, he put on his coat, walked in front of the desk, introduced himself, and I said, will you marry us? He says, yes, you've got your papers, and I'll be happy to marry us. So he married us. Then we rushed to the airport, flew to New Orleans. I had made an appointment with the Peruvian consulate. He put it in my passport. He congratulated us, and then we went to the bus station. She took the bus back to school, and I took the plane back to Dallas. This was our marriage. When you think about it, the other day I was thinking about it. We have, this is a side story. We have 3 daughters. We had 4 Jewish weddings. And when I compared their weddings to the wedding that I had.
The bar and bat mitzvah, the bat mitzvah.
And anyway, so Helga went back, and 2 months later she calls me, she says, don't you think it's time to come home? I said, if you think so, come. So we came, and a few weeks later, and at that time...
How much school had she finished?
9 months.
9 months, okay.
She learned how to ride a horse. It's another story.
Cooking?
English?
Cooking?
English? And what else?
Basically, that was it. English, cooking, makeup, I don't know. It was a
finishing school. Really.
A finishing school. What's a finishing school? Anyway, so
English was hard on me because, you know, I didn't know.
You didn't have any background.
Background of the English.
So this was it. She came, and we rented an apartment, and then I in the meantime...
Where were you living? Where were you living?
I was sharing an apartment with Max Vernon at the time. And
where in the city was the apartment?
On Kings Road in Dallas.
It was south.
Was that South Dallas?
No.
South Dallas.
Near Temple Manuel?
No, it's Lemon it's on Lemon and the area of Lemon and Cedar Springs.
And were there a lot of Jews in that area?
No.
Jews.
Okay. I never inquired whether they're living Jews or Gentiles.
Okay.
I mean, it's anyway. We were rented. Max moved out, and we stayed in the apartment for a few weeks, and then we went to Europe because I was waiting for my immigration visa. You see, when we were in Lima, we applied for the immigration visa. I had no visa to come to I had a business visa which allowed me for multiple trips for a period of 4 years, but it would not allow me to work over here. So also interesting. It so happened that the American consul and my brother were bridge partners. So when Herbert took me to the consul to introduce me, and we made the application for an immigration visa, and he said, this will take approximately 9 months to get it. I said, fine. So he said, what are you going to do until then? I said, I'm going back to Dallas and work. He says, you know, I'm not supposed to cancel your visa. I said, you can't do that because I have to go back. He says, okay. Then my brother said, you can do that. So he left my visa intact, and we applied it. So when I was over here working, you know, I said one day to my partners here, I said, you know, I think what I'm doing is not correct. I can't be in the States working, waiting for my immigration visa. I said, let me go back to Europe for the next 6 months or whatever it takes. And I'll sell cotton, what I did for the previous 2 years. And they agreed to it. So 6 months later, we got advice that the immigration visa had been granted in Lima, Peru. So we flew from Amsterdam to Dakar and Sao Paulo and to Peru. And we got the American citizenship, American immigration visa, and we officially immigrated in February of 1953. So this is, that's it. But I wasn't supposed to be a worker, but they were nice.
They were helpful.
They were helpful.
Enabled.
Yeah.
So when you came here in 1953, where did you live?
We rented an apartment in
But town and country, we were looking for, at that time, the air condition starting.
oh yeah, no, what happened was when we came back, we rented an apartment at the Town and Country, which was the only place which had,
Room air conditioners?
yes, which
Air
had
conditioning.
central air
Oh, central
conditioning.
air
Do you know where that is? It's,
That's where we live too.
oh, there too?
in
Where is
56,
it?
in
It's
56.
it's south of Northwest Highway and
Preston
Preston.
and Douglas.
Yeah, in
Preston
that
and Douglas,
area. Yeah, in that
okay.
area.
And then when she became pregnant, we went out one afternoon and bought a house. And
Clover Lane.
And where was the house that you bought?
on Clover Lane,
On Midway and...
Midway and Clover Lane.
Okay.
Yeah. in
So
that
it's a
area.
little bit farther east.
Yes.
Yes.
And did you pick the house because of the location, or did you know
No,
someone?
we liked that house somehow. No, it was
No, we
a good
drove,
house.
we drove
We
out,
found
we
this
saw the
man
first
in
house and we
Detroit.
bought it.
And we bought it, and then I was pregnant with Anita, so we needed another house, a big, one more room.
No, sweetie, this is something else. You were pregnant with Hedy
That's when you bought the first house.
when we bought the
The
first
first
house.
house.
Wait,
And then when she
We
got
had the
pregnant.
second house, we stayed there with
Until
Patsy was
everything.
was
That's what I
Patsy was
said.
born. Oh, yeah, when the third one came, the house was too small.
Okay, so the first one was born, you were in the one house, and then
The second one, Patricia, also was
in
born
the same house.
in the same house. And
Okay.
when she became pregnant with Anita, then we decided to buy a larger home. And I asked Helga and the sales lady to look around and select a house which they liked. And then one afternoon they said, I think we found the house. And that was on Lavendale. And I drove out and I liked the house and we bought it on the spot. And
It's a nice house.
yeah, it was nice, very nice. And we lived there happily for 20 years until we moved.
Then we moved on Royal Lane.
Then
Because I always
yes.
liked that house somehow.
When the children, it's strange. When the children left, my wife told me we don't have enough
Closet space.
closet space. After 20 years with the 3 children, we had enough closet space. But once they left, we didn't have enough closet space. She said she wanted to have a walk-in closet space. So I called the architect to see whether we can work it out. And one day, we had just returned from Israel, and my camera had fallen, and I called from the office on Saturday afternoon at 2. I said, I'm coming home, make a sandwich, and then we go and buy a new camera. And she said to me on the way leaving the house, there's a house which are on Royal Lane, which has a walk-in closet. I want you to see it so that you can discuss it with the architect. So at 4 o'clock we walk into the house. I walked through the house 2 times. And I said, why do we want to build a walk-in closet? This has all the walk-in closet. It has 4.5 bathrooms. I said, why don't we buy the house? And she said, well, if you think so. We made it, and that afternoon we bought that after Saturday and we bought the house.
That was a nice house too.
Yeah,
Beautiful house.
and we bought the house and we lived there happily for 30 years.
How
So-
many years have you lived in your house?
50, 48.
40 years. So you haven't changed like we did.
So let's go back a little bit. Rabbi Olin married you,
Yes,
and then you went to Europe for a while, and then you came back. And did you get involved in the temple when you came back?
yes. Once I came back, when did I get involved with the Federation? You know, you have to remember, it was for me, it was the marriage, the having children, to get started, to accomplish what I was supposed to accomplish. And so once I had a little bit of a normal life and didn't travel so much, I started to have an interest in the community. And this is when this was in 1954, 55, 56. This is when I really got involved. And I was
What organizations did you get involved in? Be specific.
practically, well, I got basically in the Federation. I was.
And what did you do
officer.
for Federation?
Well, I was the vice president of the Federation, and one of the things which I never really wanted to, I didn't want to get too much directly involved because my work required that I travel a lot. So what my function was, and I always made that clear, that I'll be happy to help when I'm available, but I couldn't, occupy
Couldn't commit to being
commit
there all the time.
to this. So I was involved there, and I was involved with the home, with Golden Acres. And in any Jewish activity, I mean, I became involved in collecting money for cards, and I went on several trips. I went on a presidential trip to Israel, which was a murder trip. You had 5 days, 1 day to go over there, 3 days you couldn't sleep, and then come back, and this wasn't good. And but I was following in the footsteps of my father. It was an obligation to be committed to the community. And over the years, I've never wanted to. Even they offered me the presidency of the home, and I didn't accept it because you either do a good job or you don't. And so they appointed me, and then I resigned because I had to go on trips, and it wasn't right. So that's what I did.
So there was Jewish Welfare Federation, there was Golden Acres, and did you get involved at all in any committees at the temple?
At the temple, no, I'm not a temple person.
Okay.
I pay my dues, I pay my contributions, and I go to the holiday. I would have liked, Helga sang in the choir for 2 years. And that was at the beginning. I loved to go to temple. I loved to listen to Rabbi Olen's Friday night's sermons. I always thought that he was speaking to be alone, not he would disregard. He had that ability, that gift, that he would be talking, but you thought he was only talking to you. And then when she quit because of the children, and Helga is a wonderful person, but she, because of her background, and she is not very committed to any religion. She doesn't believe in religion. She believes in God, but not in religion. And so I had to make a choice. Either, I didn't want to leave it alone, so I decided if that's my future, so it be. And so the only thing we do, we observe all the Jewish holidays, family, and I was very, the proof of the pudding is that we make the necessary effort to make sure that our children would marry a Jewish man, and in that respect, we had 4 weddings, and they were all Jews. So I think we did a good job at that. As a matter of fact, in 1960, I decided to Helga, I talked to my partners, I said, I have 3 daughters and I want them to marry Jewish boys, and maybe we should go to Israel. And I said, the only way I can find out, I said, let me go for a month, and which we did. And we didn't go into the best hotel, we went into the little motel. I didn't rent a car, we drove the buses and the Shabbots or whatever called. And we stayed for months, and I realized then that I could do more for Israel in the United States than I could ever do living in Israel. I didn't like it. The people were loud and aggressive, and the country was so small. This was in 1960, before the expansion. And this was not my cup of tea. So I said, and I had a job over there because the brother of my senior partner in Dallas was a big macher in Israel, and he wanted me in Israel. He wanted me so badly. He says, whatever you want, I'll get for you. So it wasn't a question of making a living. It was just, it wasn't, and Helga didn't particularly like it either, because she likes to go to good hotels. Anyway, I'm joking. But we didn't like it, and we decided, no, we're not going to Israel. We're going to see to it that they get married Jewish boys here and now. And they did. So we were very, very fortunate.
So what do you think you did to to encourage them to marry Jewish men?
I started to work on that when they were 2
He was
years old.
screaming at them.
Pardon?
He was screaming at them.
I started to work on them when they were 2, 3 years old. And I said, always, whatever you do in life, you have to marry a Jewish man. Whatever else you can do is this, but that's something which you have to do. You have to start with that at a very early age. And then they accept it and they think it's a normal thing to do. And we never had any problems. And except for Patricia, she had a French boyfriend, and I told her, this boy is not for you. He's a Frenchman. His parents are divorced, and he will screw around, excuse the expression, and you won't like that. Well, she found out the hard way.
She did listen to you, because she came back.
Listen,
Yeah, she came back.
She listened to
Came
me.
back to Dallas.
No,
So,
no,
okay,
this-
so we go back, there was a Jewish Welfare Federation, Golden Acres, and did you get involved in the Holocaust Museum?
No,
Okay.
it just gives money.
AIPAC.
No.
Any other
No,
AIPAC?
AIPAC.
And how, discuss your involvement in AIPAC.
Well, in AIPAC, I got involved because of my friend Sam Wilson. He was very active. I liked AIPAC. I was one of the early, I joined AIPAC in 1972 or 73. Because I remember I was the only Dallas representative to AIPAC in 1974. And it's a wonderful institution. And I basically, you know, wherever I could help, whether financially or otherwise, I helped. I mean, you know, because it comes natural. It's not,
Yeah, I think you have to send some Jewish student to college.
oh yeah, but this is only financially done.
Financially.
Yeah, well, of course, the institution we give every year to every university in Israel. I mean, that's part of the obligation.
So you have the 3 daughters,
Yes.
and just do you have, talk about your grandchildren?
I give that privilege to my wife
all
when I
right,
talk to
okay.
her.
So let me ask you, do you feel that there are any differences between the Jewish community when you first came here and the Jewish community now?
Well, I was much closer to the leadership of the Jewish community when I was active than I am today. The only I've been appointed as a permanent member of the Jewish Foundation, of the Dallas Foundation. But those were people, you know, who became friends. We traveled together, we socialized together, and today it's the young people, and I'm proud that these young people are doing a wonderful job. I mean, in this, the community has grown. When I came here, I mean, there were less than maybe in the early 50s, in 51, maybe 25,000 Jews. Today you have anywhere from 75 to 100,000. And the organization was, I would say, well, some people complain about the federation that they only favor certain people. I don't think so. I mean, I found it very accessible, and they're doing a magnificent job. What they have accomplished, just like in Israel, a little country in 60 years, threatened every day for its existence, but it has accomplished the same thing as happened in Dallas. When you think that these few people have accomplished what they have accomplished, when you see the various organizations, you know, the extent of the help, and whether it's a Jewish family or the Jewish Federation, or today, when we came, there were 3 synagogues. Mm-hmm. Today you have 25 or 26 temples and synagogues. Mm-hmm. And whenever you know, the growth, it comes with a price.
So let me ask you now, is there anything you feel that looking back that we didn't discuss, that we've missed, that you want to talk about? Any parts
Life
of
has
your
been,
life?
I can only say this, life has been exceedingly good to us in every aspect.
How wonderful.
So I have we've been privileged to have a wonderful life together, and we have a healthy family. I mean, a good family, and there's nothing in the world which I miss, which I could have missed. I mean, so if you ask me, that's the honest truth.
And what was the question you said you never had a chance to ask your father?
Well, when I got married to Helga, and we went, one of the points which we decided to do was to go to every place she has been before, contact all the people which had an influence on her, go to the concentration camp in South France where her parents were. And in retrospect, I should have had the foresight of taking down notes, dates, when it happened, where she was, from which date and to date. I didn't have that, and I attribute this to the fact that I was younger and we had totally different priorities, and didn't understand the significance, because
And you didn't speak the French?
And I didn't speak French, that was another thing. They didn't speak Spanish or German, or they only spoke French. I didn't speak French. So it always had to be by translation, and you lose a lot by that. Nor was I able to ask the type of question which I would ask today, you know, but that comes with maturity, I suppose. And Dallas has been wonderful to us, and I think that the people here are basically serious. They take serious their obligations, you know, towards the Jewish family here and towards Israel. One of the things which I have discovered in my life is that the Eastern European Jews have a far greater heart for Judaism than the German Jews ever had. There is a certain amount of Menschlichkeit, how would I say that, of humanity amongst these people, which I don't think the Western European Jews have. They are perhaps more sophisticated, more educated, but as far as Menschlichkeit, as far as you know, being honest and warm and feeling, I think that is far deeper in the Eastern European Jews than this. And that is, I suppose, because they depended more on each other over the centuries. They lived in ghettos, and they had the good and the bad, whichever it was. But as I noticed that and this discovery is not unique to the Jews in Lima, Peru. It's the same thing here in the United States. You have a certain amount of, if you go back into the history of Jews in Dallas, they speak about the German Jews, but when you see what they have accomplished other than their own achievements, you know, whether they are in the medical field or business field, etc., their dedication to Israel and to the Jewish causes, towards the Jewish causes, did exist, but not to the same extent and to the same reach as those who, you know, which have this. I learned, and I'm glad to say that I did not behave like a Yekes, because I don't make any difference in that respect. But, you know, you live and learn. I've been very fortunate to, my education is mainly due to my activities, and my activities have taken me to, you know, around the world, and obviously you learn from a different point of view. You learn it, and this is also goes back to the you know, well, I think I said enough.
I think it's been wonderful. You have such an interesting life, And on behalf of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, I want to thank you, Gerd Weinstein, for talking with us today. Thank you.
Well, I'm delighted, and I feel privileged to be interviewed by such two young and beautiful ladies.
Thank you.